Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
we're going to sum this up in a minute, but I wonder if you have any questions related to the New Testament text in particular. It's a lot to listen to.
I just wanted to take what you just said about living what is natural further a step further. Is that not then also the case with individuals who are transgender individuals? They're living what is in their heart.
Yes.
I mean, that seems to extend to that whole arena also.
Yes. Oh, I definitely would agree. I prayed one time in a congregational prayer for people who feel they're born in the wrong body.
Yeah.
And a woman came to me after the worship service and said to me, "No one has ever prayed for me before." I think there's a whole group of people who have, because of genetics, are gender identified one way, but emotionally and sociologically understand themselves to be the opposite sex. And what a dilemma for folks like that. If you ever want to read a great story about that topic, read Middlesex. So I forget who the author is, but a great story about transgendered, and there's some evidence that that's a genetic predisposition as well. I think the same things goes for bisexual. And one of the gifts that I think the gay community has given our world is that these categories of sexuality are no longer this kind of black and white thing. It's no longer, well, I'm this and you're that, and that settles it, whatever that saying is, right? The Bible wrote it, I believe it, that settles it. Nah, not so much, you know? We use the language LGBTQ now because of a whole, you know that gay teens are 7 times more likely than straight teens to commit suicide? We need to make room for teens who are questioning. We need to be they need to be allowed to wonder who they are, and to experiment and explore, and to not have it be all cut and dried like, well, you better decide. It's kind of like college, right? You got to know by the time you're 10 now. We're at college. It's too big a part of our identity to be putting people in little tiny boxes and saying, this is how you have to function. Just my little soapbox today. Thank you for the question. Don.
All right, then what would you say about homosexual couples up until very recently could not even be married though? And what would you say about their sexual relations? I mean...
Well, there is a text in the Bible, I wish I could pull it out, maybe this guy can help me, that says that when two people know one another in that intimate way, God sees them as married. So, you know, we flip it on our head, right? On its head. We say, when you're married, then you can have intimate sexual relations. But in God's eyes, it's just the opposite. I mean, God sees this intimate sexual relationship and says, these two people are committed to one another. So, I mean, it says a whole lot about casual sex, doesn't it? Which, I mean, hetero, homo, it doesn't matter. We're all guilty, right? But it does say something about, I mean, the fact that homosexual people same-sex people can't be in legally married relationships doesn't make their living together in sexually intimate ways a sin or illegal. My personal opinion about that. Doug.
Well, I had a question about, and again, it's just taking the text at face value, growing up, about premarital sex. You know, Jesus talked about that, and it just makes me think about that in this whole discussion. How does that come together in what you're trying to say today? I don't have that quite worked out in my mind, how that works.
Well, again, I think we have to understand the context.
Sure.
So, generally, those were marriages that were matched, right?
Arranged.
Arranged. We don't arrange marriages today. They were marriages for the convenience of familial relationships, often. They were often marital relationships between very young women and much older men, which we don't expect today. I mean, in the Old Testament it says, I'll trade you 2 goats for your daughter, right? I mean, these are concepts that we wouldn't even begin to consider. So when Jesus is talking about fornication, what's he talking about? I mean, is it, in our day and age, 2 people who are eventually going to be married to 2 other people and decide to have sex before they're married? Is that what Jesus was talking about? I mean, I'd have to do a lot more research before I'd commit to that.
Well, I think there's a lot of literal interpretation that has been sustained over centuries, really.
Yeah. I think, another wonderful subject to do in a format like this would be a history of marriage. Right now, the church is complicit with the state. I mean, we talk about separation of church and state. It's the only place where the church is complicit with the state in creating this legal arrangement so that women can still be property in many cases. None of you. None of you. Sorry, that's my little soapbox. Not us.
No. I am not your property. Yeah, I have a really difficult time, whether it's marriage or the whole issue of sexuality and turning to the Bible to get.
Yeah.
I mean, 2/3 of the Bible, in 2/3 of the Bible, I mean, every patriarch had multiple wives, and if that wasn't enough, multiple concubines. And what does the commandment mean, do not commit adultery? What does that commandment mean to Abraham, who has Sarah and Hagar, plus a few nameless concubines giving him back rubs every night? I mean, I don't, how does all that fit together? Like,
So, we have such a narrow definition of what a marriage or a committed relationship looks like. I mean, there are lots and lots of people that might have 3 persons in their marriage, or 4, or whatever. I mean, we're really narrowing down our definition. I mean, it's part of this open and accepting process. Are we open and accepting to those relationships as well? Because I think we need to be.
Yeah. I agree, and I think, again, if you did a study of the history of marriage, there are agendas hidden in the way we do marriage in this country that are not necessarily life-giving relationships. Yeah.
well, and it's interesting, Jesus was once asked by a group of Pharisees, who, by the way, didn't believe in the resurrection. Pharisees gave an example to Jesus. A woman is married to her husband, the husband dies, doesn't leave her any children. The deceased husband's brother marries her, he doesn't give her any children, and goes through 7 brothers. And they asked Jesus the question, okay, Jesus, when she gets to heaven, whose wife is she going to be? Which brother gets to claim her? I can't think of a specific time when Jesus honored our idea of family and marriage. And in that situation, he says, there's not going to be anything like marriage in heaven. He said, you're going to be like the angels, which really makes it clear. Come on. But it's just that the Bible is not always the best text for understanding human relationships. I think sometimes we see the worst of human relationships in that sacred holy book. And hopefully we can learn from the illnesses of those relationships for our own times.
Going back to the exchanging natural for unnatural, so would you say then, like those groups, like you mentioned Exodus earlier, would you say that? I mean, they're really, is that a sin for them to try to change these people who identify as homosexual and try to change them into heterosexual?
In my personal opinion, yes. Yeah,
They're not being who they are.
yeah, exactly. They're suggesting that, you know, it's like changing someone who's brown-eyed into blue-eyed without putting blue contacts in, right? I mean, it's just a messy thing, and the reason Exodus shut down is because they saw so many disasters from what they tried to do, right? Yeah, I would agree. And I think you have to realize that we're not suggesting to be experts on the issue of the sociology of this or the legal, I mean, there are all kinds of legal questions related to the issue of homosexuality, as we know with the whole marriage equality, you know, movement. How that all shakes out will be interesting to see. There are a lot of things we have to wrestle with, but I think our point is, as, and now I get to be not in the traditional role. Bleed.
Yeah.
As people who are part of a mainline denomination, we don't have to apologize for the Bible. We don't have to say, you know, well, yeah, we're Christian, but we don't really talk about the Bible. We don't really talk about it. No. There's a way to interpret the Bible that supports the mainline Protestant position. It's not maybe as acceptable as the, you know, in the Christian world, when people think about Christian, they don't think about our position necessarily. They think about, and many of us, because we've shied away from that, aren't literate. We aren't skilled in knowing these texts. And really, as a mainline Protestant church, we need to get back to some serious Bible study and really understand what this text says so that we can counter those others who want to, you know, keep the boxes alive that enslave people, right? So, you know, I'm delighted. Some of you know, Dan and I were brought up in heresy charges in the Reformed Church in America because we supported a minister who performed the wedding of his daughter to her partner legally in Massachusetts. And we were admonished. That's when I decided I was out of there. And I began the process of coming to the UCC, and I'm delighted to be part of a denomination that honors all sexual orientations as God ordained, as God given. Dan has chosen to stay in the RCA so he can wreak havoc.
Yeah. And they're just not taking the bait. I know. And I think people in power would kind of like to see me go quietly and, you know, go to the UCC doesn't need another capable minister, a white straight guy. But the Reformed Church needs to do some serious change, and if I can help in that, that's why I'm staying there. But if they're going to kick me out, it's not going to go. I'm not going to go quietly. So, I just want to say one thing before we kind of come to a conclusion. Like so many issues, like racism, like poverty, homosexuality. When we talk about it in the conceptual realm, is one thing. It's kind of distant, but when you finally put a face on it, when it becomes personal, when someone you know, when family member, that's when attitudes really change. Mm-hmm. And I think the more people discover people who are either struggling with or coming out or admitting openly their orientation, I think that's when change happens from those who can kind of reevaluate what they've thought for most of their lives or what they've been taught for most of their lives, and it does happen. We've seen it happen in many situations. So.
It's funny to me that anyone in this world today can say, well, I don't know anyone who's gay. Saying, seriously, 15% of the population's gay and you don't know anyone who's gay? I think you're deluded. Yeah. So there's some oh, Bob, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I'll probably be sorry, but the word logic has been thrown out a lot here, and logical, and I took a course once called in logic, and I really found it fascinating, and it followed me all my life. So I'm trying to apply a logical interpretation to what I'm hearing. Men and women are imperfect. Therefore, man-made laws will be imperfect. Therefore, only God's law should be followed. So, how do we interpret and or follow God's law? And may we choose not to follow man-made laws?
Wow.
I'm eager to await your answer. Well, first of all, I don't know, how do we separate God's law? What does that mean, God's law? How does God's law get to us?
I don't mean biblical law.
Okay,
So thank you. I guess I would say then we discover God's law, and because we're imperfect, we aren't ever going to know it perfectly. We're gonna struggle along to try to uncover it and discern it and decipher it.
Which is what we're now doing.
Yeah, and I think if there's any bottom line, you know, God is love. If there's any bottom line. Now, you get all kinds of semantics and specific situations. What does love mean in that situation? But I think that's an important thing to wrestle with. You know, what does love look like? You know, I don't think that a same-gender couple who lives together for 35, 40, 50 years as a married couple is living in sin. How does that happen? I couldn't stay married longer than 16 years, right? I mean, love is the part of it.
we have 9 years left.
Cut that out of the...
Maybe less after today.
Can we turn this off?
Yeah, maybe. I'm turning red.
A little bit.
That was a time for a prayer.
That's great.
Yeah, exactly. Bob, where do you want to go with that?
Nowhere,
Someone
there's
wanna-
no answer to that.
It's not logical.
We evolve.
I agree.
Absolutely.
I agree. Other comments or questions?
The older I get, the fewer absolutes that I acquire. And I think for me, aging is kind of dismantling some of the things I thought were absolutes, particularly in my theology. And I think one absolute for me that remains pretty high up there of my limited absolutes is that I truly believe Jesus was the face of God in human flesh. And to me, then, the ethical life is how do I live in the manner of Jesus? And if you study any one of the Gospels, you'll discover that Jesus was never intimidated by anybody's stumbling or by anybody's faults or by anybody's what we would call their sins, but he was adamant about those who thought they were without sin and who were typically the clergy, the religious leaders of his day, who didn't fare very well in Jesus' mind. And you know, for me, like Christian living is kind of a daily challenge to literally, and I don't mean this in a pietistic sense, is to live like Jesus, which doesn't bode very well because most of us, you know, don't look good hanging on wood. So, but that's what it comes down to.
Did you want to point out the quote on the back?
Yeah.
With your conclusions? I mean, we've kind of
Yeah, you
really
can.
covered the conclusions, but there's a quote on the bottom there that I think Dan wants
I want to point, if you want some good reading material, or you can Google his name, Matthew Vines, V-I-N-E-S. His name is on the bottom there under that last paragraph. He's in his early 20s. I think he was a student at Harvard. He took a couple years off. He came out as a gay man and spent 2 years researching various texts and studies and kind of did his own scholarly work. And you can see about an hour and a half, hour and 15 minute, 90-minute video that he created as he presented his understanding of homosexuality in the Bible and in our society. It's a wonderfully done video presentation in a church, and he's also written a book, The Gay Debate, which I would highly recommend. But just let me read those last 2 paragraphs. The Bible never directly addresses, and it certainly does not condemn, loving, committed same-sex relationships. There is no biblical teaching about sexual orientation, nor is there any call to lifelong celibacy for gay people. But the Bible does explicitly reject forced loneliness as God's will for human beings. That gets to the argument, well, if you're gay, it's okay to be gay, but just don't practice being gay, right? Okay, just be lonely for the rest of your life. That goes back to Genesis 2, I think. I am a part of creation, Vines continues, including my sexual orientation. I'm a part of God's design. That's the first thing I learned growing up in Sunday school, that God created me, that God loves me, that I'm a beloved child of God, no more, no less valuable than anyone else. I love God, and I love Jesus. I really do. But that doesn't mean that I need to hate myself or somehow wallow in self-pity, misery, and loathing for the rest of my life. That's not what God created me to do. So Matthew Vines, that'd be well worth your time.
The David Myers book we would highly recommend. And if you go to the UCC website, ucc.org, there's a whole bunch of material that you can find related to this subject. Good solid study, good biblical study, scientific study, good stuff there. So I encourage you to go there. Don?
How would you address someone in our church who would be opposed to becoming O&A? I know that's kind of on the road we're hopefully going, but I know there are some members who are hesitant or leery about it. I don't want to assume what the reasons are.
Right.
What would you say?
Yeah, I think it's a process that you have to take carefully. You already have exposed yourself to the community. The community already knows you as the gay church. And so I think, you don't want to offend people who are members who might leave because you become open and affirming. And so I think, so the process of becoming open and affirming, the way it's outlined by the UCC, is a very relational process. It's not about a bunch of leaders making a decision. It's very much about engaging the community in this way, about saying, let's learn the things we need to learn before we make the decision to do that officially. But I would say that to become open and affirming gives you something in this community that no other church has. And that is an ability to say what the future looks like, to confront the status quo where it puts gay people in a box, where it denies gay people's humanity. It says, no, we're not going to do the don't ask, don't tell anymore. We believe that gay people are not sinners damned to hell. We believe that same-sex marriage is an equal rights issue for people. You take a justice stand when you fly the rainbow flag, when you put the rainbow comma on your website. I don't think that's a position that a church like you takes lightly. I think that's you need to engage with one another. You need to talk openly about the reservations and concerns that you have, and then see if there's a way to move forward. And I think you take the next step until you decide, no, we can't go any further than this. The process is all very clearly outlined on the UCC website. It's a, as I said, it's a relational process. It's about helping people understand what all the issues are and seeking to address them through events like this, through conversations, through small groups, through studies of books and, you know, hearing lectures and sharing videos and that sort of thing. Yeah, does that help?
Yes.
Well, thank you all for taking almost 3 hours to